if ever there comes a time when we cannot agree, you have to agree with us that we cannot agree. Because if we cease to tell you what we consider is a valid point of view, then we lose the right to be a sovereign country.
Welcome to Canusa Street, a podcast at the intersection of the issues and policies between Canada and the United States. Here are your hosts, Scotty Greenwood and Chris Sands.
Welcome back to Canusa Street, everybody. We are live in studio in Washington, D.C. today on a hot summer day in Washington. And I'm Scotty Greenwood with Canadian American Business Council. Delighted to be joined by Chris Sands from the Wilson Center, our gracious host here in the Wilson
Thanks a lot,
building.
Scotty. It's always nice to see you here and always nice to see our guest.
Always nice to see our guest. It's very exciting to have His Excellency Ambassador Raymond Chretien. Chris is going to introduce you properly, but it's nice to be together in person. You and I broke bread together a few days ago, and you've been in Washington for a few days now, so we want to get into that. But before we do, Chris, maybe for the benefit of our listeners, you could introduce the ambassador properly.
Sure. Well, Ambassador Chretien is a legend in so many ways. He is the only Canadian diplomat to have served as ambassador to the United States and to Mexico, so very much a North American original. Born in Shawinigan, Quebec in 1942, he obtained his law degree from the Université Laval before joining the Department of External Affairs, as it was known then. And following postings in New York, Beirut, and Paris, Ambassador Chretien was named ambassador to Zaire, which is now Democratic Republic of Congo. And at that time, I'm impressed to read, you were 36 and the youngest ambassador in Canadian diplomatic history at the time. So that was very impressive. On his return to Ottawa in 1981, Ambassador Chretien continued his meteoric rise in the department, first as director, then assistant undersecretary, and finally as inspector general. From 85 to 1988, he was ambassador to Mexico, as I mentioned, and the Mexican government, at the end of your service there, awarded you the Order of the Aztec Eagle, which is their highest honor, particularly for foreigners. It's very impressive. My old friend Sidney Weintraub won the same honor, so I know how important it is. Then stationed at headquarters from 1988 to 1991 as Associate Undersecretary of State for External Affairs, Ambassador Chretien was sent abroad again in 1991 to become ambassador to Belgium, before serving as Canada's ambassador in the United States from 1994 to 2000, a really pivotal period. In Washington, he played a key role in the implementation of the newly signed North American Free Trade Agreement, which we'll talk a little bit about. And I thought there was a wonderful arc to your bio because in 2000, you returned to France, this time as ambassador, and you're also the only Canadian diplomat who has been ambassador to the United States, Mexico, and France altogether. So it's
That's a hat trick for you.
It's a hat trick for you, absolutely. And in 2004, you joined Fasken, the law firm, and we're delighted that you are here with us today. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be with you, Chris, and with, of course, Scotty, with whom I've worked closely in the last couple of years. It's a pleasure to come back not only to Washington, but to the Canada Center of the Woodrow Wilson Center. As you know, we're still working together. I'm still a member of your board, and it has been very interesting to follow the history, the evolution of the Canada Center. It started, I guess, in the late 1990s. It didn't even exist. I remember my conversations with Lee Hamilton about that. I thought it was a tremendous lacuna that Canada was not treated on the same footing with Mexico. Mexico had already a center, and I think that he was very interested to see that it had to be corrected. So he did correct it. I mean, the paternity of the Canada Center belongs to him, but I'm glad that I was a positive impulse at the right time. And since then, you have done a great job. I follow not only the history, but the participants to the center, what they do, how long they stay here, their contribution to the public debate. Probably more in Canada than here. I know you can correct me if I'm wrong. So it's a great success. As for Scotty, same thing. I mean, I remember, I guess in 1990, it must have started in 1995 at the embassy when you had your first big event. At that time, I guess the chamber was trying was giving a prize to a small company in both countries. and our side was won by Bombardier. No. The
Research in Motion.
Research in Motion, not
yes,
Bombardier.
Yes, that's right.
Jim Balsillie. And
That's
by the
right,
time he came
exactly.
in jeans, and these guys didn't have much money. I mean,
Yeah.
tremendous success. If you had been there, Scotty, I would have said invest $1,000 with Research in Motion. 10 years later, it would have been worth $20 million.
Yeah, you know what? That would have been very good advice at the time. And so this podcast that we're delighted to have you on is a collaboration between Chris Sand's operation, which is the Canada Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and our operation, which is the Canadian American Business Council. And, you know, you're on both of our advisory boards, and you're also so distinguished in your public service. You also have a pretty famous uncle who happened to be a prime minister. We'd love to know how he's doing. And but anyway, let's kick it off. You're here in Washington. We're here live today, which is wonderful to be back in person. What brings you to Washington, and how's it been? You've been here a few days, so what is the feel here?
I came here essentially to participate in the global meeting of the Trilateral Commission. It started on, I guess, Friday noon. It ended yesterday afternoon. Tremendous agenda covering a broad range of issues: security, foreign affairs, environment, the economy, health. We had Dr. Fauci with us for an hour. So after these 3 days, you have a pretty good idea what's going on in the world, and certainly where the American decision makers are on those issues. There's always a tendency when these meetings are held in the U.S. that the American component of the Trilateral gets far more attention and visibility, perhaps, than the Europeans or the Asiatic countries or Mexico or Canada. But it's still useful for all of us to know where you stand. And it was a revelation for me to see how many huge problems is faced by the administration right now. This confluence of major crises, whether it's the pandemics, whether it's the war now between Ukraine and Russia, gun control issue. I mean, there's a host of huge issues combined with a strange political atmosphere. I have to tell you that following those treaties, I was surprised by the view of many Republicans and Democrats in the room about how worried they were about your democracy.
Yes.
It doesn't come from me, it comes from them. Worried more than I thought they would be. So that was certainly a key point that I keep from that event. But there are also, many others. On the war between Russia and Ukraine, I could see the depth of the experience of the Americans, the tremendous facilities at their disposal to help the Ukrainians. So a discussion extremely useful for me for the months to come. So that's what brought me here. But also, I'm glad that the representatives of Quebec are here today. I work in my job at Fasken now for a few clients, but one of them is the government of Quebec on some trade policy issues, especially lumber, but not exclusively lumber. So that's why I'm here today for a couple of meetings with the lumber people, USTR, Coalition, and tomorrow the State Department. So it'll give me a good idea where that issue, not only that issue, but others involved in the relationship are at the moment.
Well, let's start there, Chris, if you don't mind. Just, you mentioned lumber, and you have such a good history with Canada-U.S. Why wasn't lumber part of the original Canada-U.S. trade agreement? Because it comes up. We've done several episodes on it. It's one of those perennial. It's been around as a trade irritant for 100 years. We get periods of peace and managed trade, but right now we're in a. Why do you remember why?
I remember very well.
Oh, let's hear it.
It's such an intractable issue that there was a fear that if lumber were to be involved in those discussions, it would kill the whole thing.
Really? The NAFTA or the Canada-U.S. free trade or both?
Or both.
Yeah.
That it was such a difficult issue to handle, not necessarily at the time when the market conditions would have allowed for a resolution of that issue. So that's certainly, I think it's, if my memory is correct, the main reason why it was not included. I mean, a lot of people were pushing for it to be included, but a judgment was made in Ottawa that it would be better not to do it.
And do you and so currently today, as we speak, there is no agreement really in place. Do you see that being resolved, or do you think we're going to continue kind of as we are for a while?
Listen, I spent many hours this morning talking about lumber. Whether the market conditions are there for a push for new negotiations, I'm sure they're not there. There's no great there's no great interest on the part of our forestry sector. Everybody seems to be making money out of lumber right now. And so that when things go well, the incitement to start a new negotiation is not the same. So we Canadians, and I'm here on behalf of Quebec, both would be ready anytime but the American side, especially the coalition, is telling us, listen, when you're ready, let us know. Get your act together, and then we'll talk. So lumber is going to be resolved at one stage. As some say, this year, your midterm are coming so fast, and the agenda is so crowded with huge issues that lumber is not number 1, 2, or 3 on the agenda. Right. It's probably number 6 or 7, and therefore the chances of it being tackled this year, in my view, are not very strong.
Let me ask you that one of our early episodes, we interviewed Senator Trent Lott, and he talked about in past softwood lumber disputes the role that key members of Congress played in really trying to find a compromise or pull together a deal. Do you get the sense that Congress is engaged on this, or are they too blinded by midterms to get involved?
Listen, if my experience is meaningful for this new round of negotiations, I was very much involved in lumber 1996. It was a big crisis then. It took us months of the industry, governments of all the provinces in the embassy to try to resolve it. And what struck me during the last phase of the negotiations was how often Mickey Cantor, who was then the trade negotiator, was on the phone with the Hill. This issue is always resolved with the acquiescence of the key members of the key states representing lumber. So I suspect next time around it'll be the same. You're probably, when we come to Washington for that kind of negotiation, we have to present a unified front. For us, it's difficult because it's a huge issue, very different in British Columbia than it is in Quebec. So just the challenge of presenting a united front is a big problem on our side. We managed it, but a great deal of difficulty.
Well, I want to shift gears for a second from lumber, as important as it is. And you mentioned in your meetings that people from around the world are worried about American democracy. And, as we sit here, there are hearings on what happened January 6th. Congress. So how does Washington feel to you? Because you've lived here, you've traveled here. So just kind of talk to us a little bit about your days here and what it's like and what does that make you think?
First of all, I was here 28 years ago, so it's a long, long time ago. Totally different situation. It was during the Clinton years, you remember that? Strong economy, great political relationship at the top. We had always trade issues. We resolved them as the present ones will be resolved, but it was not as divided and tense as it is now. When I arrived in Washington, just in the last days of the previous week, I was struck by the security around. There was just in the hotel where I was, a number of helicopters, and then on Saturday night we were getting ready to go for dinner, and then the ride we had to take, instead of taking 15 minutes, took us about an hour. There was a lot we were stopped, security everywhere, dogs, people, machine guns. And I understand it's not only the Congress now, it's the White House and the Supreme Court. Right. So Washington appears to an outsider a bit like a city almost under siege. So it strikes me as very different. Mm-hmm. So that view was quite, I would not necessarily reveal all the points of view on this, but certainly there was unanimity that it is a highly stressed time for you, and that the months to come are going to be even more delicate. Let's put it that way.
Is that well understood in Ottawa? Yes. I think the Trudeau government has been fairly deft in reading the politics here, but there's so many issues on the bilateral agenda, and we are worried about inflation and everything else. How does it affect Ottawa's sort of strategy for dealing with the U.S. when we're so divided?
Listen, just listening to these 3 days of discussions, I could really imagine our issues, so-called Canada-U.S. issues, not getting an awful lot of high-level attention for the simple reason that there's this coalescence of big issues like the price of oil, inflation, the war, gun control, your democracy. What time does it leave to your leaders to pay attention to? But to our issues. In my time, it was, perhaps you remember, Scotty, but It was easy. It was easy at the top. It was easy. I felt extraordinary access that I could. By the way, you were alluding to Jean. I have to say something like this. I mean, my name is Chretien, but my name is Raymond, not Jean. So when he was
people here didn't necessarily know that though.
No, of course, no. But I remember
what the relationship was.
I remember phoning Congress or any senator or House member. This is Chretien. They thought it was the other Chretien because we have the same voice.
That's right. Well, whatever it takes, whatever you need to use.
But I must tell you that to have that relationship, it's a very obviously favorable relationship. I mean, not only there's the blood relationship, but also the fact that I came to that job having been a deputy minister in Ottawa. Combination of both substantive policy experience with a connection at the top makes it the most important ingredient for a successful ambassadorship. Whomever sits in this job has to have a rapport with the Prime Minister. He's the only one, I should say he or she, but it's essentially he these days. He's the only one who can resolve the disputes between ministers. When it's time to decide which minister comes to Washington for what issue, somebody has to make that the ambassador plays an absolutely key role in this. But if there's a problem, a conflict between ministers, ultimately, as ambassador, you can resolve most conflicts, but there are some that are so intractable that you have to tell your prime minister, listen, that's what you're elected for, solve that one.
Right. Well, Chris mentioned in his introduction of you that you served in Mexico as Canada's ambassador to Mexico, as well as serving here in Washington. And while you were at the Trilateral Commission, the Summit of the Americas was happening in LA. I was out there for a little bit. That's right. Since I saw you last week, I've been back and forth to Los Angeles. And I'm interested in what your views are and what you're hearing in your conversations about Mexico, because there's a feeling that the relationship is a bit fraught. There's worry that this new NAFTA that we've negotiated, the USMCA, Mexico could allow the review, the sunset to happen. And I just wonder kind of what you're thinking about Mexico these days.
I was in Mexico 1985, so it's about, I hate to say it, but about 35 years ago. But remember, it was pre-NAFTA days. At the time, Mexico, we're talking about trilateralism here, the role of Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. in this equation. It was a country far more orientated towards the south as opposed to the north. There was a strong nationalist stance on the part of the Mexican government that was a bit afraid of getting too close to North America. Salinas de Gortari is the one who decided, listen, let's bring Mexico into the orbit of North America. He took some risk, and this is how ultimately NAFTA was created. I think that Salinas de Gortari deserves a great deal of credit for the creation of
Salinas.
Yeah.
That's funny because President Reagan, Prime Minister Mulroney, I think, claimed so much credit for it.
But I'm telling you, Salinas,
from the Mexican perspective, yeah.
From the Mexican perspective. And not only, from a very neutral point of view, Salinas deserves some credit as well.
Okay.
I mean,
excellent.
A good idea has 1,000 fathers, and the poor idea
right.
So it's exactly an example of that. Right. So Mexico, from that day on, and I saw it in Washington. I arrived here in 1994, just on the days following the coming into effect of NAFTA, for the implementation of that deal. In 94, I remember the first 6 months of 1994, there was a lot of still uncertainty about how it was going to proceed. And then I saw this phenomenon of Mexico having made a call, a trade policy call, but it was a highly political call at the same time. Mexico starting paying far more attention to the U.S. Mexico opening up all kinds of consulates. Every time I would go to Congress for a call, my Mexican colleague would be waiting in the room to request a meeting for the same reason. Why are you giving the Canadians what you're not prepared to give us? So Mexico went from 15 consulates to 50 consulates in a matter of a couple of years and became a very influential role, voice, and with a tremendous access to Washington, which they didn't have before. So this trilateralism has evolved since then. We have these summit of the Americas, but we also have these summit of the three leaders. I was at the first one, the Miami summit, I guess, when I was here. It has never taken hold as I would have liked it to take hold, because there are still many voices in Canada who do not like this idea of trilaterals. They say we should have bilateral discussions for us They should have their bilateral discussions. And what is left, yes, we can talk about it. But trilateralism is a never-ending kind of construction. So,
and what do you think about that? Are you a trilateralist at heart, or do you agree with?
I am, but I find that it's taking. It might never happen, especially now. I mean, Mexico is highly criticized for essentially the energy stance. Of course, there's a lot of opposition to their mining legislation. President Obrador was not in Los Angeles, I guess, for the
right. That's right.
He didn't go.
But he's coming to Washington.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting.
He didn't go to the Summit of the Americas.
It'll be very interesting.
He will come to Washington. And actually, I think we heard coming out of Los Angeles, out of the summit, that President Biden will go to Ottawa, or there will be a bilateral meeting of some kind. So there are some things that are happening.
When the three of them meet, listen, it's strange. We still have the bilaterals are as important as whatever is left for the bilateral.
So we need to have
discussion.
both.
We need to have both.
Yeah.
Actually, we need to have as many opportunities of that kind as we can organize. Listen, there's nothing that prevents a big issue to advance following a game of golf between our prime minister and your president.
That's right.
But Bill Clinton and Jean Chrétien were good buddies, good golf buddies, and that helped a lot.
That helped a lot.
When I look at North America now, and I know we have a North American Leaders Summit that Mexico will host later this year, I see President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, I see President Biden, both of a very, very much of an older generation, and Justin Trudeau, much younger, closer to our generation. How do you think age dynamics go in terms when it's time to do deals? Is it something that do old men ever change their minds? Can we really work in this atmosphere?
Listen, it does play a role. I mean, the difference in generations means a different of approach, difference in values. So you're right. It's a strange trio of having two elder gentlemen with a much younger prime minister, but it's political life, Again, I hear this possibility of your president running again, President Trump running again. We'll have 80-year-old octogenarians running. You might like it, I might not like it, but that's a reality. I mean, these are our elected representatives. But personally, I like the idea of having younger men and women just for the energy it takes. I mean, these men are facing tremendous pressure. Listen, I'm 80 years old now. I know what it is to be 80 years old compared to 50 years old.
Yeah.
I was running around in Washington far more than I can now. So it's true for
I know, you look pretty great.
For political leaders.
Yeah.
But I could be your dad.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And what's interesting is thinking about leadership and age, the Chilean Prime Minister, Chris, or President?
President, I think.
President of Chile?
Yeah.
I think his age begins with a 3.
Yeah.
And so compared to Prime Minister Trudeau, who everybody thinks is the young guy, Prime Minister Trudeau is the elder statesman, the president of Chile is the new guy, and they've struck up, I guess, a very good friendship. And let me just, good segue.
But I want to talk later on about the Canada-U.S. relationship also. What has happened during the negotiation of the new NAFTA and the mechanisms put in place? Well, if you're in...
let's talk about that. And then I also want to talk about critical minerals and rare earths, because that's a Canada-U.S. topic. Yeah. But let's stay on trade for a minute. What do you want to impart some wisdom on us, Ambassador?
On trade?
Yeah, NAFTA, the mechanisms. What do you want to talk about?
Listen, the new CUSMA, the new NAFTA, was worked out after a great deal of difficulty. We were forced to the table, Mexico as well. We didn't like it. But an enormous amount of time and energy was dedicated to make it a success. In that period of time, and I must say I congratulate Ottawa for this, they have put in place a coalition that was very effective in making sure that our issues were dealt with. Now it's in place, but we should not let go of that coalition. I mean, we have to we Canadians have to remain very vigilant when dealing with you guys.
That's right.
We're the younger part, not the younger, but the less powerful partner in that equation. We have to be on our guard all the time. And I hope that this coalition can be revived very, very quickly if we need it. So we don't see it. It's not as obvious as in Canada as it was during the CUSMA negotiations, but that I think is very important. On the trade front, listen, I mean, it's a huge part of our relationship. But my experience has been that our issues ultimately are all resolved. They will be resolved. Whatever lumber, in due course, will be resolved. L5 will be resolved, difficult one. whether,
That's the pipeline, the Enbridge pipeline, Chris,
Line 5, exactly, which we've also talked about here.
We have. And so you feel like
ultimately these issues work out. So I'm not too worried, but these are the issues that take a lot of get a lot of attention compared to what's going right in the relationship. So we'll see. Now we have these common huge challenges. I'm glad to see that Ottawa, for instance, the federal government on the issue of the war between Russia and Ukraine has taken the right stand. I think that your president has been very good in this, in recreating the coalition of the friends of NATO. This was kind of falling apart. He has provoked the opposite result of what Putin wanted. Recreating NAFTA and this coalition. So Canada has to be always vigilant about what I call the war and peace issues for the U.S. On that one, we are with you. When we have not been with you, whether it was Vietnam or Iraq, it gets to be complicated. But on the other hand, we're close. Canadians and Americans are close. If ever there comes a time when we cannot agree, you have to agree with us that we cannot agree. Because if we cease to tell you what we consider is a valid point of view, then we lose the right to be a sovereign country. Who the hell are we if we cannot say no
Right, sure.
But it's often said, and I know it's been said in some of the memoirs of presidents and prime ministers, that when they talk, and I know you've been in the room or on the phone listening in, that they often talk about the rest of the world. That the bilateral issues are not, that important because the Americans want to hear what the Canadian leaders think and vice versa. Has that been true?
It was true during my time here, and I'm sure it's still true now. Yeah. Because if you are sitting in the chair of your president, lumber is not. He doesn't dream about lumber. He doesn't think about lumber. The pipeline issue is important. That one you would know a bit more. But ultimately, when you come to those meetings, the American side always wants to discuss first the broad international issue. Still with time left to discuss our own bilateral issues, but obviously they see they want Canada to be a partner, and there was a time when we could do very useful work for the Americans where they could not do it, whether it was la francophonie, the Commonwealth. We had access to a number of multilateral fora excluded for it. So this has been a good partnership. But I see other countries. When I was here, I always felt that our access was among the best 5 in the world, 5, 6. I'm not sure we're there now.
Oh, interesting.
That is interesting.
We're coming to the end of this podcast, but I want to have you back, and I want to talk when we come back about the world. You previewed that a little bit, but with that, Chris, what a wonderful, enriching conversation, and how great to be in person with Ambassador.
That was fantastic. Well, and I think you said, success has many fathers, and you were very nice to give credit to Lee Hamilton and others for credit for our institutions, but you're our godfather. So it's nice to have you with us, the godfather of Canada in Washington.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much, Scotty.
Chris, what a wonderful discussion. Such a distinguished public servant, a global thinker, a wonderful Canadian, and to have it in person with Raymond Chretien, I just thought it was a treat.
I thought it was amazing as well. And one thing that I always get from Ambassador Chretien is the sense that, yes, he has a famous uncle. But on the other hand, he built his career on real substance. He's not one of those patronage appointments where a little bit of nepotism gets, half-rated person up. He could have been prime minister. He could be Secretary General of the UN. He is someone who just brings the substance, and he's seen so much of what has happened in Canada-U.S. relations and around the world in recent years.
Well, and I think he cares deeply, right? It's interesting to kind of walk a mile in his moccasins. He's in Washington. He's seeing the security changes that we see every day because we live here, and that affects him. And that he worries about the United States, and I appreciate that. We like to have our neighbors checking in on us every once in a while. That's good policy in a neighborhood.
I think it is, and I know sometimes it's awkward to hear criticism, and Americans can be nationalistic and a little defensive sometimes on these criticisms. But what makes Canada-U.S. relations great is that as friends, we're honest with each other, and I think he exemplifies that. He doesn't go overboard, but he says, this worries me. And I think Americans have always benefited when they listen to the Canadians speaking in friendship, but offering maybe a little bit of criticism. Sometimes we're a big enough country, we can take it.
We can take it, but we better not criticize them back. That's one of the things I've learned. Anyway.
Well, yeah, you'd say that maybe Canusa Street sometimes is a one-way road, I guess.
Well, you and I are Americans. I think if anybody's we can criticize the United States, but if anybody's going to criticize Canada, we should leave it to the Canadians, and they can be self-reflective as well. And
fair.
Actually, Ambassador Chretien really was on that as well. So anyway, all in all, a great conversation, and it's always good to see you.
Nice to see you as well.
This podcast is brought to you by the Canadian American Business Council and the Wilson Center. If you like this episode, help others find our show and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.